right. So, why don't we start with just a little bit of background about each one of your views on where venture is headed right now, where there's too much capital chasing too few startups, or the other way around, and also your view on what you see as kind of the leading edge technologies that are happening around the world, and maybe Taiwan's place in that. So Edith, from your Silicon Valley perspective, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about what kind of things interest you today, and in the technology world, and where you're investing, and how you're spending your time, and what kinds of things you're seeing that are going to be happening going forward.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, Carmen. Hello. So we were just hanging out last week in Beijing at another conference, and actually for the last 10 days, I've been spending a lot of time in Asia. So every time I particularly go into China, I learn a lot of very, very interesting things. But I'm going to actually start with Silicon Valley first, because this is where I spend most of my time. So I actually particularly focus on mobile-related investment for 500 startups. But having said that, I haven't actually made any mobile apps investment for a long time, because in many ways it's probably a little bit too late if I'm still investing in mobile apps, right? It's probably going to be the 20th or maybe the 30th if I'm looking at another music app or utility apps. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, somebody wanted to work on a browser, and I worked on Dolphin browser before for 4 years. I literally begged him, please do not work on a browser. So. But for Silicon Valley, I particularly look at more cutting edge. So I'm really, really big on virtual reality. Have done about 2 investments so far for the last few months. Those both a really, really awesome team. And obviously, 500 startups been around for 5 years. We invested in about 1,500 startup now, no longer 500. And for us, I want to say we invested in about 30 smart home related IoT companies. And I think some of our panelists sort of mentioned it in our last panel. Pretty much everybody, whenever they work on hardware, they have to come to Asia. I have many awesome Taiwanese friends, and many of them do have amazing experience in terms of quality hardware design. In fact, I want to mention, I know, like Inventec, for example, they do most of the Xiaomi IoT manufacturing, and they actually have worked with some of the local Chinese manufacturers before, but the quality was just so bad. So they really have to work with more quality ODM, OEMs. And so anyway, so for Silicon Valley, I've been spending a lot of time looking at VR, IoT related things, and on IoT, particularly on IoT software layer, particularly around security. I just invested in a company called SparkLabs, started by the former CTO of Mozilla, and they particularly focus on, so like all these smart camera, they transmitting data on the cloud. But why, if you think about, our mobile phone is just like the PC from 10, 20 years ago. Now most of the IoT, any sort of wearable, they're actually counting on the phone as the main hub. Right? So a lot of these processing is done still need to go to the cloud. Why? So now there's a whole lot of other things that we can think about on just even tiny, low battery, small, tiny devices. What other things that can be run on these tiny devices? So this is some of the things that I've been thinking about. For China, it's insane. Last week, I have a whole bunch of VC friends. Usually I go there and learn. I just really wanted to understand market more. And many O2O, online to offline companies completely fail, shut down. Even millions of dollars have been pulled into some of these startups in the last couple of years. It's just insane. And then a lot of the VCs I've been talking to in China are really into entertainment, sports, which is something I really don't understand. But having said that, I'm also in a learning mode for China market. So.
And these investments that you've made recently, where are they?
I would say I still think that for more cutting edge VR IoT related technology, I still find most of the deals coming from Silicon Valley. Not saying that there's still a lot of know-how from Asia, but I can only speak on the China part, which I just spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks. I think most of the Chinese entrepreneurs are too focused on monetization. And if they are looking at too deep tech, just take way too long to make
see.
money. So they
Okay.
don't usually focus on that.
I see. Interesting. Peter, how about you? What kinds of technologies are you seeing bubbling up that are interesting to you? And maybe you could talk a little bit about some recent deals you've done that you think are going to take off.
Sure, thank you, Rebecca. The interesting thing is about 36 hours ago, I received an email from Rebecca asking me to have dinner with her here in Taipei. At the time, I was still in Silicon Valley, so I just landed this morning. So that's just, I would echo what Vivian said yesterday, early on. Sorry for jet lag, it's not yesterday, it's early on. Flying back and forth, trying to understand the market is very, very important. Just staying here thinking innovation or flying to your lab won't work. Before that, if you don't mind, let me provide a little bit perspective about myself. I started doing venture capital 18 years ago. So I've been 97 to 04 was in Silicon Valley, 04 to 13 was in Beijing, and now I just came back to Silicon Valley doing deals. The reason I went to Beijing was at the time for people like myself who graduated here in Taiwan with a lot of physics and hardware background. Suddenly you discover the companies that went public in around year 2000 to 2004, those are mostly software companies with business models. The Yahoo, the Google, the eBay type of company. Instead of early on in the late 90s, you have a lot of semiconductor companies that went public in the US. So I decided to go to China. The interesting that I have discovered in China versus Silicon Valley in the late 90s was China had initially zero money. Rebecca probably knows GSR Venture very, very well. When I met with Sonny Wu of GSR Venture, they just were in the starting phase of raising their fund. But over the last decade, they have become a multi-billion-dollar fund. So a major trend in Silicon Valley and in China is, it used to be a VC fund is around $300 million. Now, lots of mega funds. Yeah. And because there are so few deals with so much money, mega funds have their seed fund program. For example, NEA, Menlo Ventures in Silicon Valley, they all have their seed fund program. Each deal they put in 100 to 150K. In preparation, some of them flourish, so they can put in $50 million or $100 million down the road. Now, this is all because of your fault. Because of last 5 years, all these incubator accelerators emerged, so the mega funds had to go out and develop their own seed. I'm just kidding with you. Hope you don't mind. Yeah. So, but another big interesting thing, this time coming back to Silicon Valley to do investment is it's unstoppable innovation in Silicon Valley. Technology innovation, lots of IP protection, but if you go to China, like Edith mentioned early on, it's a lot of business model innovation rather than technology innovation. This is a major difference that I see. Now, going back to what we have invested, Acorn Pacific is a new fund. We just started our operation in July last year. We invest in Angel A and B. So over the last 3 quarters, we have done 10 deals. 9 are in Silicon Valley, 1 here in Taiwan. The interesting thing is the one in Taiwan took us 4 months to get the money in because of the share structure here, the common share and the domestic company. Out of the 10 companies that we have invested, the one in Taiwan is a hardware component company. We have also another hardware company which is in the IoT space in Silicon Valley. The rest 8 of them are related to IoT and big data, software company only. So that's the trend that we are seeing. Another big trend that we are seeing over in Silicon Valley is the deal structure is much, much more different than when I left Silicon Valley in 2004. Now there are a lot of not only angel, there's seed round, there's pre-seed round, there's bridge to A, there's bridge to C, lots of different structure, very creative. And even I just saw yesterday a deal when I was in Silicon Valley who was doing their seed round with a bridge, but the cap is $20 million, which is crazy, yeah. But even though it's started by a Stanford professor and a very famous entrepreneur, but still a seed round having a huge valuation is different. So companies in Silicon Valley are very expensive. Just to give you some rule of thinking. When I was still living in Silicon Valley before 2004, 一碗河粉, a bowl of pho, Vietnamese pho, is about $4. Now it's about $10. When I was a student at Stanford between 88 to 93, monthly dormitory cost is about $330. Now it's about $1,500. Now we talk about data scientists that are a scarce asset here in Silicon Valley. I would say a fresh graduate, if your major is doing something related to data scientist, your average salary starting is about 100 to 120K. So think about it. If companies here have enough innovation to go to Sand Hill and raise money over there, but spend money here, I think you will create a lot of opportunity because of the arbitrage. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, Peter. Thank you. Jay, SparkLabs Global. It's actually another new fund, relatively new fund. And tell about what you're seeing today that seems exciting, that where you're spending your money.
Yes. Can you hear this? Is this on? So I've appreciated the conversation here today, and I think I should start by perhaps sharing back a positive message. Anytime you get a room full of people worrying about the ecosystem, do we have the right pieces in place? Is it too comfortable? Are people hungry enough? I can assure you it's only going to get better. Because when a community is going through that kind of self-evaluation, it's a very positive dynamic. The other part of why I say that so confidently is because as I run around the world, we're 6 partners spread around the world by design. We're in Palo Alto, Chicago for a while, but that person's relocated to Korea, London, Israel, Singapore, and Hong Kong. We're trying to cover the globe. We know it's difficult. We're respectful of the fact that you can only go so deep when you're so spread out. But the point is we're trying to be in a number of tech hubs to give us perspective. That perspective is for ourselves and is for our entrepreneurs who become our LP, our portfolio companies, and it also helps us liaise better with our LPs. So, oh, sorry. Hopefully I was loud enough. When I come to Taiwan, I would just remind us all, and I think we all know this anyway, it's not necessarily about all the ingredients here, because increasingly it's a global world. You hear the previous 2 speakers referring to getting on a plane from Silicon Valley to here. Never mind going to Hong Kong tonight, going to Singapore, going to Jakarta, and all this kind of stuff. And the last bit I'll just say about this is, when I'm running around Finland or Sweden or Berlin and these other places, and even Silicon Valley, because as has been pointed out here, although we're a global fund, still most of the investments we do are in Silicon Valley, where the quality is extremely high, and we feel like that gives us nice leeway into better situations in Asia and around the world. The message we're hearing increasingly is how do we, as a successful company elsewhere in the world, tap into the Asian demographic? It's a 4 billion person demographic. It's increasingly playing out. Yes, there's divisions called countries that make up the Asian demographic, but it's something that the world wants to have access to. One of our advisors that we were lucky to get at SparkLabs was Ray Ozzie. He came to an event where we call our Korea our spiritual home, where we have an accelerator. So that's kind of where the partners gather 3 or 4 times a year to work together with our new companies. But Ray came to the first event and we said, Ray, does the Asian demographic matter? And he said, for all of my career, no. In the last few years, to me, yes. I've spent 2.5 months this year in China. I think I'm going to spend 3 months next year in China. We're pursuing the Asian demographic like everyone else. So if that's the backdrop, it's only going to get better for me in Singapore, for you in Taiwan. And by the way, we're all in each other's cities anyway, or we should be. I mean, we've had, of the 6 partners, 4 of us here in Taipei in the last 5 weeks. It's got to tell you something.
Okay, good. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Mok. I'm partner of Gobi. I cover actually Southeast Asia. So I think in terms of your question about whether there's a lot of capital, overhang of capital, I think in the short term, just looking at Southeast Asia alone, Singapore government has actually put out about $300 million last year. So there's actually a lot of committed capital. But in the short term, because of the sentiment, I think coming from Silicon Valley, China, now going to Southeast Asia, a lot of VCs are actually not as active deploying capital. In terms of the technology...
in Singapore or
in Southeast Asia in general.
Southeast Asia.
In Southeast Asia in general.
They're not as active in deployment.
They are not as active. So even though there's a lot of committed capital, short term, I think a lot of VCs are actually holding back.
Yeah, but Gobi's not.
Gobi is not. So we actually have a contrarian approach because we've seen the downturn before in China. The best time to invest is actually during a downturn because this is the time, if the guys are able to raise money, these are the winners. During a rising tide situation, the challenge is you cannot figure out who's the winners and losers because everybody is getting money. So for the winners to win, you actually have to raise more capital. So I think in the downturn is actually precisely the right strategy to invest, because the guys that you're investing are most likely the winners that come out from the downturn. In terms of technology, so from my perspective, so for those of you who are sort of old enough to understand the 80s, I think what is old is actually new again. So in the 80s, there are three technologies that is actually very hot. You have VR, you have AI, and you have hardware. I think these are actually hot again. So I think from a certain perspective, as an outsider, I think this is a good chance for a lot of Taiwanese entrepreneurs because they are playing to your strength. In fact, when I first came to Taiwan 30 years ago for military training, Taiwan was actually the most advanced countries among the 4 Asian tigers. It was the first time that I actually saw a karaoke machine. It was actually in a village in Taiwan, right? So I can tell you that actually Taiwan, I think along the way, because it didn't catch the China wave, sort of stagnated. But I think this is a period where, if you ask me, given the salary here is relatively cheap compared to Singapore, you have a lot of good US trained engineers. This actually might be the best time to invest in Taiwanese startups. And from a Southeast Asian perspective, once again, there's two different perspectives. In terms of Taiwan, obviously you have the technological startups. I think they are well suited for the advanced economies, for US, for Japan, the advanced economies. But for the emerging markets, I think there's an untapped market in terms of Taiwanese startups in the food and beverage space. So Taiwan actually has a very strong cultural influence in Southeast Asia. So if you look at a lot of the Taiwanese franchise, whether it's Cha Time, it's Black Ball, they're doing so well in Southeast Asia. So I think that's actually a market that the Taiwanese may not be looking at, but it's actually very relevant for the Southeast Asian market.
We have a number of venture investors here on stage who have invested in some of the companies that were profiled in the Forbes Asia issue. 500 Startups has, Gobi has, SparkLabs has. So I think that's really interesting, and some of the Taiwanese companies were highlighted in that too. But picking up on some of the themes that have been talked about earlier today is the serial entrepreneur, the hero entrepreneur, the whole startup ecosystem. Do you see that developing here in Taiwan? I mean, in China, there's so many companies that people can rattle off, like Didi and Xiaomi and JD and Alibaba and Tencent. Does Taiwan have a chance to break through to that kind of level, to have that kind of hero status that helps to spur a whole new generation that's coming up? I think that's one of the issues with Silicon Valley too, is that you do have these heroes. So do you see this happening in Taiwan anytime soon?
So,
I would just, sorry, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
after you.
I would just say, maybe I'm sounding overconfident here, but to me, Taiwan was the original hero with its cluster effect for the chip industry, which I was at Morgan Stanley for a number of years, and all we ever talked about was Taiwan. And Finland had a little bit of that, with its Nokia success. And I think that A, establishes Taiwan as an ongoing tech hub, and B, it's in the water. They've done it before. They know how to do it again. Maybe there's a refocus going on, or recalibrating resources or whatever it is. But when you see the size of the companies being built in China and around the region right now, and Southeast Asia is a legitimate market. Not only people in Asia care about that, but people globally are attacking many times the Southeast Asia market. It's not always about North Asia. There's awesome opportunity, and if that doesn't wake anybody up in any country, then nothing will. So I think Taiwan is going to be on their toes and be capitalizing on this opportunity. And if there's things within policy or programs or whatever that need to be refined to tweak that, well, that's the same in Singapore. It's certainly the same in Hong Kong. And it's, Jakarta now is starting to wrestle with this at an earlier part of the curve. But I just think everybody just needs to focus on what's going on in the region and jump in and participate in what is awesome success taking place.
I just want to call one of my friends out, Paul Wu from Gmobi. I think he will be. He's not here. Damn it.
He was here.
He was here earlier. I think
he's coming back.
He's an awesome software-focused entrepreneur who loves Taiwan. Every time I talk to him, all he wants me to do is to invest in more Taiwanese company. And I think, we can name a lot of amazing hardware-focused hero from Taiwan. but at the same time, I think the biggest thing is that when you get money from like some of the like previous entrepreneurs, they can share a lot of experience, war stories, and like be able to have another wave of like software-focused startup. They would love to have angel money from Paul and learn from, these are some of my experience, and that is it's a cycle. So
the whole mentorship and
definitely.
Yeah.
And I started to have 2 amazing companies from Taiwan, Inventec and TPK. They're both like my really, really close partners. I started to look at a lot of IoT deals, and when I do that, I bring them with me because I don't know anything about manufacturing. If I'm talking to a particular hardware focus in Silicon Valley, I bring them in because I don't even know like how to figure out a bomb. Is that right or is that wrong? I have no idea. So I think sometimes it's good to actually bring have other, even though it's hardware focused, to kind of bring some of these guys to think about this is a sort of new wave to really get that whole cycle going.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah. I do have some perspective I would like to share because I've been in so many places for an extended period of time. Number one, think about the big market between comparing China versus United States. There are people from Taiwan that have been in China for an extended period of time, just like York and myself. We have been there, observed the tremendous growth in the past decade, but eventually we decided to retire or leave China. But another perspective one wants to develop is a lot of people that went to the US, some of them that came back to China or Taiwan, but a lot of them decided to stay. What does that really mean? A good friend of mine who told me that everyone in Silicon Valley is an immigrant. He is 3rd generation. He still remembers his grandmother came from Finland, spoke with very heavy accent, interfaced with a very limited demography of people. But he is the 3rd generation in Silicon Valley. He looks like a true American to me. That's his home. In Taiwan, it used to be we have a lot of people went overseas and came back, but 3rd generation, this is my recent revelation, becomes localized. You will want to encourage a lot of 1st and 2nd generation immigrant, be it from anywhere in the world. In Silicon Valley, out of the 9 companies we have invested, the demography this time is very different from over 10 years ago. Over 10 years ago, it was a lot of Taiwanese Chinese, a lot of Americans. But this time around, it is very different. Indian, German, Russian, French. The demography has changed. Silicon Valley keeps on evolving, and the demography keeps on changing. Well, what I see in Taiwan, gross margin of Foxconn went from 13% probably 12 years ago down to a little bit above 5%. It's monotonic. So we need to embrace, if we cannot absorb foreigners to work here, at least fly over there to get to understand what's going on a frequent basis rather than just once a year. Because even for me, I used to live in Silicon Valley for 16 years. This time going back, it is very different. During this last 11 years, I go back about 2 times a year. Still, living there is very different from traveling there. So I had to encourage startup here to develop a wide vision to go there not just twice a year, at least 4 times a year, just to talk to people. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, Peter, you've had several very successful deals out of China, mainland China. Do you see anything coming forward in Taiwan that could replicate that kind of success you've had with many?
Yes, definitely. I think IoT is a big space that Taiwan definitely can play. If we only fall only to do hardware manufacturing for IoT, that's not good enough. Remember, there are 3 layers of IoT. The first layer is an infrastructure of sensor. The second layer is the sensor collects the data. The third layer is to do big data analytics, including artificial intelligence. These are the 3 layers of IoT that I can see. I think Taiwan definitely is very good at the first one, but the important thing is how do we migrate to the second or even the third layer. Yeah, so I believe the previous Stanford alumni, Hsieh, her company is doing a lot of these. I forgot the name of the company. Sorry. These. So these are the good trends that we should grasp. This is a once in a lifetime. We need to embrace a big trend for us. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Yes, Mark?
Yeah, sure. Just jumping in my perspective, I think, as I mentioned, the old things are new again. They actually playing to the strength of Taiwan. So I think IoT is a space where there could be emerging heroes from Taiwan. Sometimes I do feel as an outsider, I can see certain things which Taiwanese may feel is taken for granted. So part of it is actually how strong the hardware or semiconductor industry is in Taiwan. Sometimes you never realize, but the Singapore government in the 90s was actually trying to go against Taiwan. They actually gave up. So in the end, they actually sold the semiconductor company to the Abu Dhabi government. So that's how good your hardware industry is. So part of it is actually, I think, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, it was the rise of China. I think Taiwan didn't really capitalize on it compared to the other ASEAN countries. But with this wave of IoT, I think this is the best chance for Taiwanese companies to seize this opportunity because of your strength in hardware.
We're seeing a really major boom in global venture capital. I think the peak was last year. And do you see in Taiwan, is there enough capital here to get these startups to the next level, get them to scale, not only locally but regionally and perhaps even globally? Is there enough capital here in the market? And where does that need to come from? Is it a local source, a regional source, a global source?
I would say there are a lot of very good quality startups, but it's just good quality. The vision is not big yet. I am a mentor of AMA this year, and I constantly tell the companies that I mentor, at least develop a vision to reach 500 million in terms of revenue. But a lot of companies here whose vision is only up to probably 10 million US dollars, which is not big enough. Be greedy. Think positive. If the vision is there, money will definitely flow. I am not worried that Taiwan does not have enough venture capital. If we have good enough opportunity, the Sandhill people, the Sequoias, Neil Shen living in Hong Kong, they will all come here. Yeah. So.
And Sequoia has done some deals here.
Yes, exactly.
Not necessarily Neil, though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So if the deal itself looks good, not just good quality but small, it has to be big enough. Make sure that happens. But how do you make that big enough? Embrace diversity. Talk to lots of people. Just now over there on coffee break, I exchanged with a fellow UMC Capital gentleman. I learned something from him. Constantly talk to people. In Silicon Valley, I trust Rebecca knows very well. Meeting starts from breakfast, right? All the way down to the evenings. But in China, a lot of deal exchange, of course, is late night karaoke, but I've never had the opportunity to participate. But talking to people, knowing the differences, create diversity, increase the vision is very important. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think Taiwan is in some ways very similar to Hong Kong, which Hong Kong is all real estate and finance. That's plenty of money, right? But I think the biggest thing, just to add on what you said earlier, there's a few things. Like every time I talk to a particular startup, for some of you who are startups, it's all about your understanding of what could be the potential market. It's all about your thought process on when you're explaining what you're working on. And I think a lot of the Asian startups founders, when I talk to them, they always talk about what they're doing. And the what is fine, but I think like the main thing is about you. Like who are you and why you, your understanding of the market. And I'm always will ask you, have you launched? Yes or no? If not, even for 500 startup, most of the companies that accepted to accelerate programs, if you're consumer focused, usually if you're mobile apps, at least 100,000 install or more. Otherwise, I have nothing to look at in terms of monthly or daily active. If you're enterprise, at least enterprise is actually not about your product, it's about how good you can sell. I used to work for SIBO and Oracle. They have no product, and you can still sell. So it's all about how many pilot customer initially, at least like 3 or 4. Because even you have the best product, it's very difficult to beat like Salesforce and all these other guys, right? So it's all about your ability to be able to quantify what you're working on. And I think that's it's just a matter of training. But whenever I talk to a Taiwanese or Hong Kong startup, they have a lot. They have issue explaining why they're doing it.
Yeah. The vision thing is very crucial, as both of you just pointed out. Mark?
Yeah, so my perspective on the VC in Taiwan, I think for small markets like Taiwan, if you look at Singapore and Malaysia, actually the government needs to play a jumpstart role. Because a lot of this capital has to be supply side driven. So what I'm seeing right now in Taiwan is actually we're getting there because NDF and obviously Alibaba is coming to put in money. So I think that will jumpstart the ecosystem. So it's good for them to think big, but the question is actually, for the start, there's actually no VC money out there. So I think the government has to take an active role. If you have a big enough markets like Indonesia, the family office will come in. So if you look at Indonesia, they were actually underfunded maybe up to last year. The big families all came in. The Lipo, the cinemas, they actually come in to sell a venture fund. So once you have a big domestic market, you don't have to worry about private capital coming in. Is unfortunately for Taiwan, you have a small domestic market. That's why the government needs to play an active role. And it's a bit ironic that actually, Alibaba took the first step ahead of the Taiwanese government. That's actually very ironic.
Yes, it is. Gobi is really paying a lot of attention to the Southeast Asian markets today, though, and there's not all that much government money in there except for Singapore. So why are you going into these markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, etc.?
That's right. So ultimately, I think Jay was mentioning about the demographics. So if you look at Southeast Asia, it's actually a very young demographic. It's actually a market of the future. If you look at smartphones penetration in China, it probably is saturated. The growth are all coming from India and Indonesia. If you look at Indonesia, there's a population of 240 million. Half of the population is less than 30-year-old. So just the next billion consumers are all coming from the market. So the key is when you actually invest in the home market, they could be Singapore, Malaysia, but ultimately you need to scale in a large domestic market. And I think that's the challenge for Taiwan is where is your scalable market? Is it China? But if it's China, the Chinese entrepreneurs have taken that. So it's not that easy to go into China either. So for Taiwan, is it US? Possibly because of IoT. Or is it Southeast Asia? In certain food and beverage sector, there's certain strength for Taiwanese. So I think the key thing is you need to understand where is your scalable market for Taiwanese startups.
That's a good point. Anybody here active in Southeast Asia? Okay, one. All right. One lone person.
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere, though. He's global. Anyone here active in Silicon Valley? Okay, a few. Anyone here active in Taiwan? Okay, anyone here active? No, just kidding. Still awake. Okay, I'm going to open the floor up to questions. Yes, here on the side. Yes, and just wait for a mic to come to you, please.
Thank you. I'm John Williamson. I'm a hardware startup. Some of you may know me. I'm a serial entrepreneur and wanting to start a global business in Taiwan, leveraging all the good things we've been talking about. Really a question for Peter or Edith. What would you do differently looking at the capital structures and the difficulty you had getting money into Taiwan? How would you do that differently to using global VC funds to create a global company based in Taiwan?
Sure. I think number one, I would encourage most companies in Taiwan to set up an overseas structure. Make it easier for foreign VCs to put their money in. In such way, also, your valuation and I believe the mentality of the entrepreneurs will be different. Think about it. If the VC invests in a pure Taiwanese company at common share instead of preferred shares, would he be as generous in terms of your valuation? The answer is definitely no. If he has preferred share, he may have liquidation preference and other preferential treatments. So when you're discussing about this valuation, it is easier for the entrepreneur because the EC has some preset type of arrangement. That's number one. Number two, try not to show entrepreneurs commitment when you're building companies here by working with VCs that ask you to mortgage your house. Of course, by default, you need to have that preparation. But in Silicon Valley, no VC asks the entrepreneur to mortgage their house to show commitment. The reason of this is very important because now that, number one, you are raising money at a higher valuation because you're a common share structure. Number two, you are mortgaging your house to get the money into your company. So once you become the boss, you are very stringent to your employees. And that is what has happened. That's the 恶性循环, I don't know, the negative cycle that has not happened, that has not been very helpful here. So I would encourage to set up an overseas infrastructure, and afterwards, when your company becomes more successful, if you want to go back to Taiwan to get listed, restructure it to a Taiwanese company. That's fairly straightforward. Thank you.
I think we have some lawyers here in the audience who would be very glad to help out on that front as well. Yes, there's another question.
I want to quickly chat about this because my previous company was invested by Sequoia China, Matrix Partners, and Qualcomm. The first thing that we did was to move our entity to Cayman, and then Cayman owned Delaware, Cayman owned Hong Kong Wi-Fi China. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a tax expert. But obviously, these things change. Like most of the Chinese deals now are all in RMB and Chinese entity. But I think it's not only for VCs. Obviously, they do that because they want you to go public, someday somewhere, right? And it's not that Taiwanese stock market is not good, but I'm just saying like most of the VC want you to go big. So the legal entity, the sooner you get it done right, then all the IP will still doesn't worth as much. It wouldn't cost you as much for you to sort of move things around later on. So it's really more for your own good. That's one. Second, I wonder where my other partner, Hsieh and Alex, is somewhere. We 500 Startup, we have our local partner. And if you have any questions, we have all our legal document completely open source. It's 500.co/KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, And we want, because we do so many deals, if every single deal is sort of unique, different. We've spent too much money on legal fees. So we just want everybody to use, you can use whatever. All these is really open book. Doesn't matter equity or convertible note. We want people to understand like these are the 3 or 4 things that we always care about. And we want to explain it to you so you can just use all this. Literally, I have done a deal from the minute that I decided we're going to do to wire money over because we use our own doc less than 5 days. It's awesome. And we should all do deals like in this suite.
Hi, Sebastian again from FNR. Cloud ERP, do you see any room in terms of investment from your perspective? ERP online, cloud ERP. Back office solution, ERP, enterprise resources planning, cloud ERP.
Well, isn't it similar to a SaaS model?
It is a SaaS model.
Yes, but think about it. The very interesting thing is SaaS companies, a lot of them have very high valuation. But if you look at a company who has been a model sample of SaaS is Salesforce.com. If you look at the income statement of the company, over 50% of its sales and marketing costs, over 50% of its revenue is in sales and marketing costs. That's why Salesforce.com is not profitable yet. Another one that's also very famous, as the name of the company is mentioned today, is LinkedIn. It's also a not profitable company whose sales and marketing cost is over 50% of their revenue. All the story of SaaS-related companies has been, we can become profitable, but we just want to grow our user base. But what's puzzling to me is Salesforce.com has been around for quite a long time. So as a VC, I'm always puzzled by SaaS-related models. But it is not a VC's job to judge whether profitable or not is good enough because it's the story that is important. For us, you can invest in a non-profitable company, but the VC still make money, entrepreneur still makes money, but eventually the stock market crashes on yourself, right? So I would assume if you want to develop an online ERP-related company that's more or less having a SaaS model, try to somehow minimize the sales and marketing costs. Try to show the VC that you can do that to, if it can be 20%.
I believe it can be profitable.
I'm sorry?
I believe it can be profitable.
Yeah, but the rent, the rate at its growth.
Can I just jump in on my perspective? So I worked in the US before. Asia and US are a little bit different. I think in the US, a lot of businesses actually do pay for services. In Asia, I've tried to sell, let's say, $1 million software to, let's say, the Thai people before. They say for $1 million, I'll hire 10,000 workers and automate the whole process. So sometimes it doesn't really work in places where labor costs are too cheap.
If I may, we have some new e-commerce. Shopline is one example. I think 500 Startup has promoted Shopline. People are paying. If they start to be successful, they provide a solution. They will, all those people who are doing e-commerce, they will soon come to the needs of an ERP to sustain their growth and to sustain their issue. People, I think, in Asia start to maybe pay if it brings the value. But maybe, yes, in some Asian countries, people are more reluctant, but they come to it, I believe.
Okay, so any last question, please? One last question. Someone who has not asked a question yet. Someone who has not asked a question yet. Come on, don't be shy there.
Hello, I'm Frank from Yuandai Hsieh Investments. So thank you, Kay-Mok, for mentioning the Asian market for venture capital. I actually have a question for Edith Yeung, because I also learned that 500 startups just launched their micro fund of $10 million in Vietnam. So I'm just wondering, like, how would you compare the Taiwan environment to Vietnam and other Asian market here?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've been watching 500 startups launch all these microfunds throughout Asia and some of the up-and-coming markets, like you just mentioned.
So before I answer this question, I got really inspired last week. I listened to David Wei, who was executive at Alibaba. And he said he had a conversation with Ma Yun. I don't know if you remember that one. He said to Ma Yun, why Tencent? It's like selling Baifen. Like they make so much money. Why do we? This is maybe like 10 years ago. Why do we selling like doing e-commerce? We don't make enough money, and what they're like selling Baifen, and what are we doing wrong? And then Ma Yun was like, just wait and see. And you know, one of the things that's really inspired me from this conversation, I think every single country have their cycle. And you know, Jay mentioned earlier, you know, like Indonesia, there's a lot of young people, and these young people is going to grow old, right? So when they are younger, they play games. When they get older, they have kids. They have to shop for baby stuff. So I think every single country have their cycle of like what makes more sense in terms of growth on various different vertical. So back to Vietnam. So our thesis is to identify amazing local, brilliant, usually former entrepreneurs to help us to find the best talent, best deal in that geographic area. That's really our thesis. It's all about people. So in Vietnam's case, both Eddie and what's his other name, Ben, who was a former founder of Cloud. They're amazing guys. They know the market really, really well. Have an amazing network. So we want to empower them, and we will for sure do more, because our whole thesis is that, you know, Silicon Valley is not the world. The world is everywhere else. Just because, as much as I'm very, very bullish on the Valley and still think tons of talents, we do believe that there's so many amazing people around the world where we want to support and invest early. So we will have a lot more news, and plus, Dave is sort of crazy, so you know he will for sure to support all these initiatives if we find the right talent and people to support.
Can I just add one comment to what Edith just said? Everybody here earlier was talking about capital, getting access to capital, and I wasn't fully familiar with the programs you're running on the micro funds, but that's great. And we're seeing more of that happen too. We saw a great program in London. There's a group called Entrepreneurs First. I don't know if everyone's familiar with them, but they invest in tech talent, pre-team, pre-product, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can see capital's innovating too. It's not just sitting there like dumb money, like you got to come and get it. they're increasingly changing their own game to try to figure out better ways to play the real talent in the region. And by the way, they've also demonstrated at the same time an ability to find that talent coming out of university, right? So they're not going to the people with the greatest resumes on planet Earth. That would be one way to do it. They're even going earlier into the system to find young technical talent and backing them pre-team, pre-product. So this is getting pretty exciting. I mean, it doesn't mean it's going to show up at your doorstep tomorrow, but capital is trying to match with the future entrepreneurs, the future talent, and you know, we're looking at trying to bring programs like that out to ASEAN and Singapore and such. So it's not something that's remote anymore. It's going to be right here in our backyard soon. And 500 Startups is already doing it, evidently.
Yeah, it's definitely getting younger and younger. I had someone pitch me a story a couple weeks ago. What I write about is 8-year-old son who had developed an app, and I thought, okay, well, maybe we'll put him on stage as well. So, and this is a pretty high-profile guy in Shanghai. So I would like to actually start to wrap this up now, and we'd love to get a photo of our venture capital panel here before we wrap it up. So just give us a second. And I know that Taiwan is definitely getting that startup feel, because if you look at what our photographer is wearing today, you could see that it's a very startup-y kind of techie feel. And I particularly love his red shoes.
He works in IoT startup at Taiwan Startup Stadium, so.
I see, okay. Thanks again to our sponsors, KPMG and Taiwan Startup, and also the Taiwan Tech Makers Association. And please join us on our Silicon Dragon tour. We'll see you again soon. I'd love to spend more time in Taiwan. Thank you.